Hi, I'm John Paul and a really warm welcome back to my channel. Today I'm just going to do two things. The first one is going to be give you an update on some of the things that are going to be coming up on the channel over the next few months, which I hope you'll find helpful and interesting. And then go on to actually talk about three books that I've been reading recently as well, because I think there are things that have come up in them. In fact, in each case, there's a particular point that I would like to draw out that I think would be interesting for you. It's interesting for me. I think it will be helpful, generally for people, but also looking specifically at somebody in the context of kind of therapy and therapy training as well. They're not actually specifically academic therapy books, but I'll come on to that and explain that to you. So just starting out, looking at what's coming up on the channel, I just wanted to mention four things at this point. The first of those is I'm going to be continuing with the series looking at things that are good complements to therapy. Of course, I'm a talking therapist, as I talked about in the previous conversation with Richard Rogers, who went from a trainee therapist actually to a garden designer. He talks a lot about how nature, garden design really complement what can be achieved in talking therapy as well. I'm going to continue with that series. As I say, the next one is talking to somebody who works therapeutically with art. Her name is Nellie. I've already recorded it. She works at somewhere called the Fire Pit, which is in Greenwich, and she does these amazing classes, works with people who have, some people have, some real severe mental health difficulties, and then others who just want to learn a new skill. It was lovely to talk to her. She sort of describes how some of the classes go and the effect that it can have on people, just how she facilitates that group. There's lots of things that have come out of that I think will be helpful for people generally as far as their mental health, but also helpful to bear in mind for us as therapists as well. So there's that, and then just the next one as well after that, I'm going to be talking to somebody called Bob Heath, who is a music therapist. He was previously a songwriter, I think, and then went on to train as a music therapist and now works solely as a music therapist. And I had a chat with him, and he's got an amazing knowledge as far as kind of scientifically how music works for people, but also, very practically, he's going to be in his studio and by his piano. So that's my favorite instrument. So I wonder whether maybe he'll be playing the piano a bit for us as well. So again, just looking at how it works with being a music therapist, about how sessions might be structured, and of course the really significant benefits that people experience as a result of them. So that's continuing on that series. Also, I'm going to be talking to a trainee therapist about the pros and cons of training to be a therapist, specifically the pros and cons. Of course, I have spoken to a couple of other trainee therapists on here before, so this is somebody else. Everybody has their different experience. She is a couple of years into the training, and we're going to talk about all kinds of things, specifically things that have come up for her, perhaps around finding a placement, financially as well. She's also one of the youngest on her course, so it's interesting to hear about that. Actually, I do hear people write in saying about, am I too old, am I too young to train to be a therapist? It does seem to be something that can be around for people. So I think that's an interesting one to talk about, to think about. So I will hopefully be recording that with her over the next few weeks. The third one is I'm going to be recording a conversation with somebody called Michael Toller, who is a psychotherapist and therapeutic coach as well. It's going to be about his career. He is psychoanalytically trained, but is also an integrative therapist. So he's going to talk about his journey into the profession, what that was all like, career transition as well, because I know that's something that comes up for a lot of people. And he was talking about how he used coaching and a coaching qualification, coaching clients in order to facilitate that transition to a practice as a therapist, and continues to be a therapeutic coach as well. So interesting to hear, I think, about the relationship perhaps between coaching and therapy. The reason I'd heard of him is that he was in the article, which actually I posted below a previous video here, which is a BACP. It was in their BACP Therapy Today magazine, and it's about portfolio careers. And Michael was one of the people that was interviewed in that portfolio career, because alongside his therapy practice, he's also developed a Clinical Will app. I don't know if you're aware of the Clinical Will, but we'll talk about that. It's an obligation on therapists when they're in practice to have this Clinical Will, which means if there's sort of death or serious illness, there's another therapist who has details of clients that they can contact them. Obviously a very good idea, rather than that being the obligation potentially of somebody's next of kin. Anyway, Michael, who's very interested in the kind of ethics and practicalities of being a therapist, developed this app. And I think we're going to have a first part when we're going to be talking about his kind of career and how he sets things up and his portfolio career. And then we're also going to have a second part to the conversation, which is actually going to be about a lot of the ethical things in terms of being a therapist, so clinical will, data protection, those kind of things. It's something that I've focused on a lot less, I think, in videos. I mean, they're all things, of course, that I do, but they're not necessarily top of the list in terms of my psyche. But they are very important. And of course, for people coming through into the profession, they're all things that need to be in order. Michael really is interested in them all very much. So we're going to have a conversation about that, which I'm really looking forward to as well. And then just to finish off, the fourth thing, I'm going to be speaking to Kaz Binstead. You may have heard of her. She founded Trainee Talk, which is kind of an online organization where trainees get together to talk about what's happening for them. She's co-founder of Therapist Connect, which I think started on Twitter, but is now across social media, kind of an international collection of therapists and counselors who kind of share knowledge, ask questions, and also just generally talk to each other, of course. Kaz, amazingly as well, she co-authored a lot of the private practice toolkit, going from student to psychotherapist or to therapist. She co-authored a lot of that material for BACP, so she's got all of that amazing experience to talk about as well. I mean, the actual reason for her coming on the channel, timing-wise, is that she is releasing a book through Routledge, which she's co-authored, I think, in November next month. Relational Ethics in Psychotherapy and Counselling Private Practice. So she's talking about relational ethics in having a private practice, and she's going to be talking about all of that. She actually interviewed me for the book. I'm a case study, I think towards the back of the book, I haven't seen it, actually about you, about this YouTube channel, which was amazing, and it's in that book. So we'll be talking about her book as well, and all of the, I'm sure, wealth of knowledge and experience that's in that too. And I think if you're coming into the profession or a therapist currently in the profession as well, I think that conversation is going to be really interesting for you too. So those are the things coming up. The other thing, as I say, that I wanted to do today is just talk very quickly about 3 books that I've been reading, because I think they'll be of interest to people, and there is a particular point in each book that I also wanted to draw out again very quickly. The first one's a book by somebody called Dr. Anna Lemke. It's called Dopamine Nation, Finding Balance in the Age of Indulgence. She's a psychiatrist, Dr. Lemke. I think she works a lot with people who are addicted, and that's really what the book is about how to manage addiction, how it gets set up, and dependencies. But fundamentally, of course, the key factor there is dopamine. Of course, there are the obvious: sex, drugs, gambling, alcohol, but what she's acknowledging in here, that phone, social media, food, shopping, they all work with that kind of dopamine chemical. And I think the book is really great at explaining how those processes work, that if you get this rush of dopamine, for homeostasis, actually the brain is going to send you back the other way to give you a low. So I thought that was an interesting point. But there's a particular point that I wanted to draw out here, because I haven't really heard of it actually in other books, or never really in the training either. And it's the point that she makes about lying. She does quite a lot on it, and she has something called radical honesty, which means that she does herself, and also as in her own family, encourages her addicted and dependent clients to use radical honesty in her life, i.e. to always tell the truth. Now, I think from a personal point of view, there are reasons, of course, why somebody might not tell the truth, which are not about exploiting other people or taking advantage of other people. They're just at times about, sparing up somebody else's feeling. But I can also see that people might lie because they're fearful. So it could actually aggravate anxiety. People might lie to facilitate their addictive behavior. So to move addictions out of life, perhaps to make sure, that kind of radical honesty is helpful. What she believes, from my understanding of it, is that to kind of override the lie, or the tendency or the compulsion to lie, requires the prefrontal cortex being brought into play. And actually, I think if you're looking at countering anxiety, countering anger, countering narcissism, or managing those things, and addictions, of course, actually the part of the prefrontal cortex is really key. Most people would say that actually, it's the part that manages those parts to make sure that we get the best of our fear and our anger, and that it's not working against us, that we get the best of our reward part, but it's not developing into addictions that have got adverse consequences. And her belief, again, my understanding of it, is that to be conscious of it, to make choices at times not to lie, is developing that prefrontal cortex. So it's going to help, of course, the honesty will help with intimacy in relationships, vulnerability, all those things which are very connecting with other people. So I think what she's saying is that it puts energy into that part that's about connecting with others. It puts energy into that part that will override those parts that disconnect us, our fear, our anger, the dominance of reward. So, and I can really see it. I think it's quite a helpful idea. As I say, there'll be extremes of it. Personally, radical honesty completely the whole time on every matter, I don't think is necessary. But I do think it's something that is an interesting one to pay attention to in ourselves, really interesting one to notice. And because coincidentally, I was watching a terrible film actually on Amazon Prime, I won't even say the title of it, on the evening that I was listening to the book, and there was a quote that somebody used. He was giving a talk, as I say, coincidentally, about lying, and he gave a quote by George Bernard Shaw. And that quote says that the liar's punishment is not in the least that he is not believed by others, but that he cannot believe anyone else. I think what that's saying is that if we know that we lie consistently, how are we going to believe what anybody else says? And if we can't believe what anybody else says, how do we feel safe? Trust is a basic, fundamental, a key component of connected relationships. We will not move forward to commitment with other people in any context as far as relationship if we don't feel safe. And a fundamental component of that is honesty. So generally, as I say, I just think it's a really interesting idea, and I'm going to try and talk about it with other people as well, perhaps in other conversations too. But I would love to hear what you think about that, any ideas that you might have, any views that you might have about it as well. The second book I'm going to mention, just very quickly, as I say, is The Art of Empathy by somebody called Carla McLaren. And it's all about empathy, as the name suggests. I have talked in a previous video about the importance of empathy, about how I noticed that in the training, we don't actually do much. I mean, everybody should be empathetic. I don't think necessarily that somebody's going to get through the training if there is a total dearth of empathy. Having said that, nobody specifically, from my memory, asked what I thought empathy was, whether I believed I was empathetic, to give examples of my empathy, how my empathy manifested in my relationships with other people. Anyway, I think empathy is an absolutely key component of connected relationships with others. So I think it's really important to be looking at the degree to which we do it. I also think empathy and the presence of it is anti-anxiety, is anti-anger. If you look at anger, I've mentioned in other videos, it's a victim-perpetrator. That's how things constellate. And of course, if we believe somebody's a perpetrator, we don't have any empathy for them. And if they're angry with us, vice versa. So the presence of empathy is a counter to kind of chronic anger. Narcissism, I think the presence of empathy is a key component there. As I've talked about in the videos on narcissism, often narcissistic people will be seeing other people in terms of whether they are dangerous or useful. Their reality, having empathy for them, the other person's felt experience is not relevant, save to the extent that around this kind of usefulness or dangerous point. So actually, to encourage empathy for ourselves as well, for ourselves is really important, and also for the other person can be kind of a counter to narcissistic views of the world too, I think. And of course, a lack of empathy can come up both for ourselves, but also for other people in addictive behaviour as well. So to make sure that we know what that is, to be thinking about that, to be thinking about the part that it's playing is really important. Interestingly, from memory, it was a while ago that I listened to the book as well. It's not just about developing empathy, which for some people is their journey. Some people will be over empathizing. If you look at quite a lot of people probably that come in to train as therapists, their difficulty, so to speak, might be that they empathize too much with others. So where are those boundaries? Where do they end and somebody else begins? How porous are they to other people's emotional experience? So I think looking at empathy generally, I don't know if it's on your courses, if you are doing a course, the extent to which it is, how you find it, whether you think about it, whether it does come up much on the training, in discussions. I would love to hear from you if it is all talked about and sort of taught much more than it ever was when I was at college, because it can be learned. I think that's the key thing, both in terms of empathizing with others. It's a skill. It's like love is an emotional skill, but also this putting boundaries in and not over empathizing with other people can also be something that's learnt. And I think this book, The Art of Empathy, is trying to do some of that as well. There are exercises, examples, all those practical things to work on our empathy. And just the last book, last but certainly not least, it's called The Expectation Effect by somebody called David Robson. Whether you've read it, it's a kind of Sunday Times bestseller, I think last year. And I think it's very interesting. I'm only part of the way through it. I listened to it on an audio book, about a third of the way through. So much evidence. Basically, he would probably summarize it differently, but the way I would summarize the expectation effect is that the power of expectation, or expecting something to go well, increases how well it's going to go. For example, the examples that he sort of starts with, and as I say, there's so much evidence in there that he provides, is the placebo effect. So that well-known expectation effect that if we are given a placebo, even though there's no active ingredient in it at all, the fact we're swallowing a pill increases the power of its effect, or gives it an effect, and means that we will heal quicker in studies. The bigger the pill, the more we heal. If it's a capsule rather than a pill, even though there's no active ingredient in it at all, it increases our healing. It engages our body's own ability to heal from whatever it is. He also talks about the nocebo effect. So if you explain symptoms to somebody, if a GP talks about symptoms and side effects and just leaves it as that, people are much more likely to experience those side effects. So it works both ways. And he also, which I think was why I wanted to talk about this from the point of view of therapy as well, he also mentions, from memory, I think, that when GPs say that a side effect is present, but that it shows that the medication is working and that the treatment is working, again, people's healing gets quicker. So you might wonder why I'm talking about all this in the context as a therapist, but I wonder about the expectation effect in terms of people coming to therapy. I think it can be a powerful effect on somebody, that there's a belief that coming to therapy is going to help them, a very, of course, valid belief. And also, I think equally, from a therapist's point of view, are there ways in which we can talk about how things might go or how things might progress throughout therapy that are going to help engage clients' expectation effect? Of course, nobody wants to be leading anyone astray or making false promises, but I think there are ways to phrase things when talking about things with clients, absolutely based on the very real hope and optimism that I think most therapists would have of the role that therapy can play in people's however you want to look at it, people's healing or recovery or journey. And I think it's interesting to think about what those things might sound like, when we're talking about how things might go, how the therapy might go, how things are framed. So it's just something that stayed with me afterwards, thinking about it with clients. And I, again, would love to hear what you think about that. Do you think it's something that can be used within the therapy room without, of course, making promises which we can't make to other people, but can we somehow engage that expectation effect with clients in a way that's going to be helpful for them? So, as I say, would love to hear what you think about that. Those are the 3 books. I hope the update on what's happening and also those books and those points have been of interest. Please do, as ever, make any comments that you would like below the video about anything that I've said, any topics that you would like me to cover, then please do write that below too. I will always try and do that as well. I really appreciate you watching. Please do like or share the video if you have found it helpful. Please do subscribe if you haven't already. As I've said, I'm going to be coming up with these future videos as well. So I look forward to seeing you. You take care of yourselves, and I'll see you again soon.